Okay, why don't we get started? Happy Thursday, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many folks here joining us for our Thursday Lunch and Learn with VCU ACE. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Chiquita Seaborn from York County Public Schools. She's a coordinator of student services there and a champion of transition planning. When she agreed to do this, I was so excited, and I know that you guys are going to get so much out of this and such practical information. So without further ado, let's have Chiquita start. And remember that you can put questions in the chat box and we will get to them either throughout or at the end of the session. So thank you again, Chiquita, and welcome to Lunch and Learn.
Thank you, Stacy and the team. I am extremely excited to be here to talk about transition planning with families. As the families in our school division know, transition is truly my mission. And so it really excites me to be able to just share a few of the keys to successful transition planning with families today during VCU's Lunch and Learn. And a few housekeeping items. This session is recorded. By participating, you're consenting to being recorded. But before the information is shared, it will be edited to remove the identifying information. And we will be using the chat. So we have the awesome people from VCU who are monitoring the chat for me. And we'll be able to have a little bit of discussion after the presentation. Before we get started, Stacy is going to help me with a poll. So it's going to help to gauge, and so I can see who's in attendance today. And I do see we still have a few people joining us, but what best describes your current feelings about transition planning? And as you see, we have excited, prepared, unsure, nervous, or overwhelmed. And I'll just give you a second to actually complete that poll. I'm loving the excited, prepared. For my overwhelmed people, that's okay. I think by the time this session ends today, you're going to have some valuable information that will help you with that. And just unsure, that's okay as well. But these keys will definitely help you. And Stacy, it looks like we have probably the bulk of our audience, it looks like.
It does look like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for participating. It helps me a little bit. And hopefully by the end of this session, you will be able to post in the chat that hopefully you're feeling a little more prepared and possibly excited about this. So, and again, thank you, Stacy, for launching that for me as well. All right, so let's go to our next slide and kind of go into when we talk about keys. So why is keys in the title of this presentation? Well, this word cloud provides synonyms for the word keys that really helps us to understand how important this information is to successful transition planning. So you'll see words like vital, essential, significant, and important. And that helps to explain why the topics that we're going to discuss today, I refer to them as keys. And hopefully they will help to move a lot of our participants from that unsure, from that nervous stage to just a little bit more of the exciting and rewarding. But before going to talk about today. I do want to share, it's the video, it's just a snippet of a video. It's a minute. And you watch this video, think about the transition planning that had to take place for this young man. Feel free to place in the chat any comments that you have as we look at the video. And at the end, we will definitely discuss and we will have time for questions or comments about this. Also, I will provide Stacy with the link to the full video for those families who would like to look at that.
How do you get through your day? Make it from one place to another, one task to the next. How do you do it?
Every step of the way in life, there have been people that said that I can't do things, said that I couldn't ride a bicycle. There have been people that said that I couldn't live on my own, couldn't get a good job and support myself, or I couldn't go to college and graduate. I don't listen too much to people when they tell me I can't do something. There's not a whole lot that's gonna stand in my way. There were a lot of people that when I first started at Hendrick Motorsports, they had no idea what I could do and what I was going to do there. I have some guys that I'm good friends with now, and they told me that when they heard I was coming and when I first got there, their biggest thing was, what is he going to do?
And so I share Richie's story because it's one that personifies a lot of the keys that we're going to talk about today. Although I do not personally know Richie and you only saw a minute of his story, I am certain that there was successful planning that allowed him to be able to drive. I hope you were able to see how he started his car. Also, to be able to attend college and to be able to work full time. So it's evident that Richie's plan had to include many of the keys that we're going to discuss today. I will note the field of transition, secondary transition, is extremely broad. And I could easily spend an hour or two on one or two of the keys. So we don't have that time today. So what you're going to receive is just an overview of some information. And of course, you can go more in depth with all of these keys, but I'm sure and I hope it will be very beneficial for you. So let's get started. So I'm sure that many of you on this call today, and thank you for joining again. And I do agree with Stephen Covey's message of beginning with the end in mind. But I'm asking you to stretch yourself just a little bit more beyond that graduation that many of us think about when we hear begin with the end in mind. So I'm encouraging you to begin with the future in mind with this key. And the future, it can be full-time employment. It can be military training. It can be, again, training programs for our students. So just help your child to envision what that future can look like for him or her. Also, allow and encourage dialogue about how they envision the future. Make sure that although transition planning is required to begin at age 14, that we know that the elementary level provides the foundation for successful transition planning. So this is an extremely important time. And I do want to mention the important work that Virginia is doing, even at that elementary level, because we have those academic and career plans that are being developed with our elementary school students. And these plans are for all students. And if you want more information about those academic and career plans and how they could possibly relate to transition, I'm sure your child's school will be able to provide more information about that. But also within this key of beginning with the future in mind, I urge parents to take advantage of all parent training opportunities. And this includes the wonderful training that you're attending today and all of the VCU Lunch and Learn sessions. The agencies usually help to provide parents with that information that really helps to make that transition planning process a bit smoother. Now that you're beginning to envision the future, and we are allowing the student to be at the center, it is important to encourage independence and self-determination. And when we're doing this, we want to make sure that we create that safe space where they can take risks and know that it's okay if they don't always get things right. That's part of our learning process. Even as adults, we make mistakes and we learn from those mistakes. So know that your guidance and support levels will also likely change. And sometimes as parents, we have to prepare for that because at the elementary level, we're a lot more hands-on and our children usually need quite a bit more support from us at that level. But then by the time that our students get to that secondary level, our children have that increased level of self-determination and independence. And so they're able to utilize a lot of those skills that we've been building and teaching them to be able to really advocate for themselves a little more. And so that parent piece of what's happening there often changes. Not that you're not involved, but it can just look very different. And so allowing your child to make choices is an aspect of that self-determination. And again, the level of choice making is going to vary, just like it is for that level of IEP involvement and different items of self-determination. So but there are ways to implement choice making at all levels. And when we're thinking about choice making, we know that's one of the elements of self-determination. And those students who are self-determined, they're the ones who are able to advocate for themselves. And not only advocate for themselves in school, because remember, we're talking about transition in that sense of the future. So we want to foster and build those skills while they're in school, but we're thinking about that future. What about in a training program? What about in the employment setting? We want to make sure that those skills are generalized and that those students are able to utilize those skills in school and beyond. And so I mentioned the elements. And so let's just take a quick look at those elements. And I know through the Lunch and Learn series, you've received some information about I'm determined and about self-determination. But I wanted to include this in the presentation because it is the pillar of the self-determination work. And the site provides us valuable tools to aid in the development of the self-determination skills that were included in that last key. So when we're looking at these elements, we talked about choice making just a little bit in our last key. But remember, they also have that skill of making decisions. And I'm going to refer back to us thinking with the future in mind. They're going to be adults and need to be able to make those decisions. Problem solving, that can be very difficult for us to stand back and watch some of those mistakes that we just talked about, or some of those things that we don't feel have gone so well. But it is part of that self-determination process and part of transition and giving them those skills that they're going to need to be successful as adults. Again, this is found on the I'm Determined website. I won't go through all 9, but these are the elements of I'm Determined. And so also, what other resources are there for families to help to foster that independence and that key that I just talked about? These 2 are examples of checklists. And although you may not be able to see them extremely well, the first one that is a little shorter, that's that elementary level. And as you can see, the first question addresses the child attending his or her IEP meeting. And that is something that we stress. We want to try to make that first step. And now remember, attending the IEP meeting at the elementary level can look very different from attending at the secondary level. For some of our children, it's a bit much to ask them to remain at that IEP meeting at the elementary level for the entire meeting. But we're using items like the 1-pager on the I'm Determined site, or one of the templates that's on the I'm Determined site for them to begin this process and learn a little bit more about it. But then take a look over at the other checklist for the secondary. You'll see it also includes attending the IEP meeting and those pieces, but they've incorporated that goal setting, checking progress on the goals, and not only checking the progress, but making plans for reaching those goals. And so these are just a few of the tools that you can use as a parent to be able to assess how your child is doing in that area of self-determination. And there's also tools for the educator as well as your child to be able to check their self-determination as well. So again, just a few resources to help with that key that we just mentioned. And when we move to this key, in the world of special education, there are a vast number of acronyms and jargon that we tend to use. But this key involves understanding that individualized education plan, or that IEP. And I'm going to use another one, SPIN. And that SPIN is the strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. And we know that that IEP, of which that transition plan is part of that IEP, we know that it should include the SPIN. We know that. So again, within this IEP process and the SPIN, then we want to ensure that our students are at the center of the development of the IEP. And I'm going to tell you a quote that some of you might be familiar with if you've heard me give presentations before, but if not, it is something that has guided my work. And I try to share it with as many educators and parents and students as possible. But it's nothing about me without me. And I'll just give you a second to think about that. Nothing about me without me. And so when we think about that quote that was shared many years ago, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which conference it was that I received that information, but think about us as individuals, as adults. When we're able to create our own goals, we work extremely hard to achieve those goals. How would it be if we were asked to work on the goals that someone else had created for us and not our own personal goals? It's probably not as exciting to be able to do that. And we want to make sure that we have our young people at the table and that we're valuing their input and that we have their voice there. Something else that is here when we're talking about that IEP and the spin, we want those age-appropriate transition assessments. And so when planning for transition, I have a few questions. What assessments have been completed with the student? Has there been a variety of assessments? Is the assessment data and the spin used to assist the student with transition goal development? Because remember, if we're giving these assessments and our young people are having these assessments, we want to be able to use the data. So definitely look at your IEPs to see exactly what assessments were given and what does that data contain. And another area, are those transition activities. Remember, the transition activities and services are developed to help your child to achieve those post-secondary goals. So what transition activities and services are going to be provided within that IEP cycle? Very important to the transition planning process. And the course of study. That course of study is letting us know the coursework. What is happening in the courses? What courses is the student taking that is also going to help them to achieve those post-secondary goals? So this key does not only start at that transition age of 14. Again, we're going to back that up to when that IEP begins, to just know the components of the IEP. But then looking at those assessments and understanding that data is especially important when it gets to that transition age. Now, that last key flows very nicely to this one. No diploma options. Diploma status is extremely important and the key that impacts post-secondary options. Knowing that diploma options, knowing the diploma options that are available and the requirements for each diploma. So what you want to do is begin reviewing this information again, as early as elementary level. I do encourage families, just know that. Because as your child enters school, we want to know exactly what it would take to exit school. And I do caution, and I'll let you know, that there have been some changes to diploma options, diploma requirements, but if you're using this key and staying abreast of those changes, then things will be fine. I also want our elementary families to know, who are on the line, there are a lot of decisions that are made at the elementary level that can impact diploma status. So that's what makes this key vital to the transition planning process. Know and understand what it takes to receive certain diplomas in the state of Virginia. And know that when those decisions could be possibly made at the elementary level, that they could impact that diploma status, and as well as those transition post-secondary goals. So as I stated, there have been some changes within diploma requirements within the last decade. And we've also had things like credit accommodations for students with disabilities. And we've also had the ability for them to earn locally verified credits. So I do urge all families to know what state testing is required to obtain those verified credits. Also, VDOE provides a list of what we call substitute assessments that can be used to obtain the verified credit if the students are unable to receive the credit in the traditional way of state testing. Now, again, that list will be updated and it has had some changes over the years. So just be sure to review the most current information to find out about those substitute assessments. Now, as a parent at the high school level especially, I encourage you to review your child's transcripts annually to assess where they are with graduation. Many schools provide families with an annual document that captures this information. And then sometimes it's in a graphic to really help you to understand these are the courses they have taken, these are the verified credits they've received, and this is still what's needed. So sometimes it's in the form of a document. In other school divisions, you have access to electronic platforms that provides this information, and you're able to look at it. So it really doesn't matter about if it's paper version or electronic version. It's just a matter of you as the parent being informed and knowing exactly where that student is or where your child is in that plan for graduation. And that again flows nicely to what I like to call as the 2 C's: collaborate and communicate. And collaboration with school partners as well as community agencies, again, extremely important in that transition process. So as the students' goals and aspirations change, it's important that key stakeholders are informed. And remember, we said change is okay, and it's expected during this transition planning process. So, for people who do tend to become a little bit overwhelmed because children change their minds, let me give you an example of things that were happening when I was a case manager a little bit. So my middle school young people, a lot of them wanted to become NFL or NBA players, professional athletes. And this was at that middle school level when we were really beginning that transition planning process. Well, by the time we did a lot of the things that I've been telling you about in our keys, they really understood their spin. And at the high school level, they started telling me, oh no, I want to work in recreation at Parks and Rec, or I want to be a personal trainer, or I want to be a physical therapy assistant or something like that. So just remember that it's okay for them to change their minds as they learn more about themselves, as they're participating in those awesome transition activities that we talked about in one of our keys. It's likely that they will change their mind, and that's okay. So also I mentioned Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. They are usually a team member in this transition planning process. And so as that student's aspirations are changing and they change their minds about things, it's important that they're on board with that and that they know that as well. Because they are usually providing what we call pre-employment transition services. Now, within your schools, you might hear it referred to as pre-ETS services. And then beyond school, they're able to provide VR services for our students. But while your child is in school, if they're linked with DARS, more than likely they're going to be receiving some pre-ETS services. And so DARS is a vital member of the team. Changes in address, telephone number, or other areas that could impact the student performance should also be communicated to the school. But don't forget to communicate those items also to your outside agencies. Because when they're in school with us, it's a little easier to keep up with some of those pieces. But for these outside agencies after graduation, if they're attempting to reach you or reach your child at a number that is no longer valid, then it's very difficult for them to be able to provide those services or provide updates about different things that they're able to offer. So any of those changes, just be sure that even beyond graduation, that information is communicated. And in preparing your child for employment, as much as possible, increase communication opportunities within the home as well as the community. And I know there's been a lunch and learn about some of this, things that can be done within the home as well, but within the home and the community. And then as we think about, again, the future and employment, which is the goal for most of our young people, then we know that some of them will utilize assistive technology. And that assistive technology can look very different. One of the ways that we use our assistive technology, many of us, is with our iPhones. And I'll use iPhone because that's what I have. But we use the scheduler, we use the speech to text function. And so we want to think about, as we're collaborating, communicating, we're at the table discussing all of these wonderful ideas with our student in the center, with your child in the center of the planning. We want to think about, how can assistive technology be used to foster that independence that was mentioned in the other key? How can we utilize that assistive technology? Where is it that assistive technology can possibly come in and remove the need for that individual to be able to ask that human for support? Because we do want to work on fostering that independence to the highest level possible. Okay? Because remember, all of this is individualized. So we're not saying that this is going to work for all students and all young people in all categories at all times. What we're saying is, to the greatest extent possible, how can we teach and foster independence utilizing something like assistive technology, especially with the phone that most of our young people will be using anyway, or a device, an iPad or some other devices, but as much as possible to be able to use that. And so now that we're at the point, we've talked about a lot of the keys to get us to this point. We just talked about communicating, collaborating. We're at that stage where we're really trying to partner with those outside agencies. It's important now at this key to begin researching employment opportunities or programs. So what in-school programs are available to provide instruction on those valuable workplace readiness skills? You also want to find out what work-based learning opportunities, internships, or paid employment exists. And this last bullet that I'm urging families to just learn a little bit more about is the increased number of post-secondary education and training opportunities for individuals with intellectual disabilities. It makes me extremely happy to see the number of programs increasing, and not only within Virginia, but in other states as well. So we want to research these options just as you research options for those community colleges and four-year universities. But remember, when considering education or training programs, also research the funding options. because, it really does depend on how much the programs cost, what funding is available, and you just want to be aware. You want to be aware of all of that when you're making or helping your young person to make decisions about what that next step will be. And we can't discuss researching post-secondary education programs without very briefly, mentioning Section 504. Again, research your education options. I strongly encourage you to have discussions with that school's accessibility services, inclusive services. It's called different names at different training programs or educational programs, colleges, but just find out at the one that your child is interested in and have that conversation with them. When you have that discussion, talk about the inclusive services to learn what about those services, what accommodations, and also try to get a feel for the culture. If it's going to be a program that they're going to attend rather than virtually, especially, try to get a feel for the culture of that particular school. But you do want to be able to have those discussions. Now, we're going back to one of our other keys where we talked about that self-determination, because it is at this level of where we're saying about the post-secondary education and training that most educational places really require for that parent to step back a little bit at this stage. So having that self-determination is extremely important, because we know that our young people will have to advocate. They will have to advocate for themselves. And in some instances, they have to schedule their testing if they need to be in a small group. Then they might have to schedule their exams. It might be quizzes, everything. And young people are usually responsible for doing that scheduling. So again, self-determination, and you'll see it's embedded in multiple keys. And just remember, the entitlement of FAPE under IDEA is different from Section 504 that is adhered to by the colleges and universities. So we won't spend a lot of time on that, but I think it's important as you're researching and helping your child to get to the next step in that post-secondary education process, that you understand just a little bit how that's different from receiving FAPE under IDEA. And so I call this one the essential key, because what we want to do is with that top bullet, enjoy the transition planning process. And I won't say that it won't be difficult in some parts of the planning process, but what I will say is when you're informed, then it makes the planning process just a little bit easier. And I hope that's what we've been able to do today. It's just to give you a little bit of information to make the transition planning process a little easier. I also encourage you to celebrate the successes, big and small. So if you've been working with your child and your teacher has, and she's trying to get them to complete, let's say, the one-pager, and they were able to complete one square of that one-pager, then let's celebrate that. That still allows us to get some of that student voice. Let's celebrate it. So celebrate those successes. You also want to allow your child to explore and dream big. As I listen to multiple I'm Determined youth leaders, they talk about how there was just this one person usually who really encourage them to dream big, go for it. You know, set your goals, make those things happen. And so that's what we want to do. We want to be those cheerleaders. We really want to be those cheerleaders in the transition process. And then provide opportunities to evaluate decisions. I'm a parent, so I know that sometimes our young people don't make the decisions that we think that they should, but provide that opportunity for them to be able to evaluate it. Talk about pros and cons for a lot of the decisions. In the last key, the other key, we were talking about different programs. So let's even allow them the opportunity to talk about the pros and cons of the different programs before they decide on a specific program or a specific school, but allow that opportunity for them to be able to do that. Networking. I cannot stress enough to parents how wonderful it is to have a parent network of some sort where you're able to learn from the experiences of other families and some of the things that they have encountered. So I do encourage you to have that network. Also, it is a busy time in transition planning. You're probably going to receive a lot of information. And within this information, it's probably included a lot of activities that DARS or your school team would recommend for your child to participate in. So just consider those. Make sure you're looking at them again, allow that student to have the center and allow them to say exactly what it is that they would like to participate in. There's a lot of information with PREETs, pre-employment transition services right now. So I know it can get to be overwhelming, but just take your time. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask questions and get your questions answered. So now, what happens if we use all of these keys that I've mentioned today? What does that look like? So I want you to, in our last slide here, I want you to meet Caden. His family imagined the possibilities. Caden's parents allowed him to make choices at an early age, and he decided he wanted to participate in a variety of sports. He played sports with his friends and wanted to be in those classes with him. So his family advocated for him to be in the inclusive setting as much as possible. Caden and his family also took advantage of the numerous school and DARS provided transition activities. He graduated from high school and is now enrolled in a certificate program at Hocking College, where he continues to be on the football team. So Caden and his family allowed me to conclude the presentation with a little bit about his story because they enjoyed the transition planning process. They took advantage of a lot of the opportunities that were there. His mom asked a lot of questions. She was able to also be an advocate and help him along the way. So I hope with the keys that I've shared today, that you find them helpful as you navigate secondary transition. And I also hope that eventually you will find this process to be just as exciting and know that Caden's outcome of a wonderful journey of him working to achieve his post-secondary goals can also happen for your child. So again, thank you so much for being able to, for coming to this session today and allowing me the opportunity to just tell you a little bit about the keys to successful transition planning. And now we'll have the live chat.
Hold on, I was muted. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Thompson with the ACE team. And Chiquita, I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing these important things with us. I think it can be a bit of a daunting time in life. And so these are definitely things that will help us out. And I wanted to just scroll up through the chat and share a couple things that were kind of going on in there during your presentation to bring it.
Sure.
Yep. And the first one is, we had some concerns about how to really use that time in elementary school to prepare for those future goals. And so, just trying to think, we don't want to pigeonhole them maybe too early into a specific thing, but what types of foundational skills are you really thinking to focus on at that time?
Great question, Katie. So yes, at that elementary level, remember those elements of I'm determined? So that is exactly what you can focus in on with that piece of I'm determined at that elementary level. So we want to talk about choice making. At the elementary level, we're able to provide choice. So that choice making, decision making, being able to be problem solvers, that's a skill. But all of the elements of I'm determined can begin at that elementary level. Also, you will see on the I'm Determined website, they have an IEP template as early as pre-K. They have a pre-K template for involving those young people in their IEP. So although we're not saying, that they have to, go ahead and say exactly what their goals are, because remember my example of my middle schooler, right? So we know those are going to change. We know they change. It's very likely that goals will change, but we do want to build those foundational skills at that point, at that elementary level. Great question.
It is. And there we're exactly talking about, how to get the individual involved, the student involved early. Lots of cheers to your "nothing about me without me" quote. And I think we all want to clap at that one. So please add some additional questions in while we have this little bit of time left with Chiquita. Just drop them into the chat and we'll bring them up. Oh, also lots of cheers for Caden. Thank his family.
Thank you.
Share that. And him. Thank you for the valuable information. Also, a question just came in about if there is a specific transition planning assessment to request other than just asking for a comprehensive assessment. If there's not a specific, if not, there's specific areas of assessment that should be looked at when reviewing transition options.
So another good question. But transition assessment. So what your case manager is going to be looking for is what data is needed. And then there are a vast number of transition assessments that can be completed. So it's very difficult to give the name of one. We have at our disposal many transition assessments, and they're not all where the student has to write into the transition assessment. For some of them who need a reading-free assessment, there are reading-free assessments. So there's a variety of transition assessments out there, and it really does depend on the level of the student as well as the information that you want to gain from that particular assessment.
Okay, and so I guess that's reaching out to a transition coordinator within the school system or something if you want to have some conversations about that and what they're doing, just so that you can be looped in and support that process, perhaps?
Yes. So very important. The case manager, if they don't have the transition specialist or transition coordinator, the case manager can provide that information. But just remember, it is listed in the transition plan what assessments were completed. So as you're looking at that IEP, you want to look at that transition plan to be able to see what transition assessments were completed and what that data yielded. So definitely check with your child's case manager to find out a little more about either what transition assessments will be done or what transition assessments have been done.
Great. And we had another question kind of come through the chat about maybe students that are diagnosed sort of late in the game or are maybe resistant to getting into programs that might also help them with transition. And so are there some suggestions about where you could start career counseling and planning when you're kind of a little behind in the process?
Okay, so definitely not a problem. That is not a problem. It is begin when you can and when that student is diagnosed. Again, I'm going to tell you the I'm Determined platform will be your very best friend. If you're in Virginia, you're probably familiar with I'm Determined. If you're not in Virginia, still check out I'm Determined. They have parent resources, teacher resources, student resources. Being able to look at those videos with your child, even if they are diagnosed, what you said late in the game, there's still opportunities to look at those videos, to go over some of that information, and to really help them to understand how to advocate for themselves. And that's the key, because remember, although we're doing that in high school or at school, we want them to be able to do that in an employment and beyond as much as they need it. So I strongly encourage, even if you are at that level of just beginning this process, look at that I'm Determined site. And the summit is open. The registration for the summit is open right now. So I strongly encourage getting into that group and learning more about the summit and allowing that young person to be able to network with that group as well.
Yeah, and sort of the same person sort of piped in and said that the student refuses to acknowledge and doesn't want to say the word autism or really identify in that. Any thoughts or response to that? Have you seen that in your time?
So I will say I have seen that. Not as much recently, but when I began transition work many years ago, I had more individuals who really did not want to make that known. But I will say we work with them where they are. And we talk about it. So the other piece to why I like I'm Determined is because we're focusing in on the strengths. And so many times, if the young person has received a diagnosis, they're hearing the things that they can't do, right? But what we're doing with I'm Determined and really working on those elements and the spin to really help them, we're focusing in on the strengths. So that brings us to a different phase of really helping them to say, guess what? You're awesome. You know, you're this, and this, but now can you just tell me a little bit of what's difficult for you? But really start with the strengths. And when we have, I think, that mindset, it makes it a little easier for our young people to be able to, just become a little bit more involved in this process.
Right. I love that. I love that response. And I think that, alongside that, what comes to mind is how many of us look for what our strengths are. This isn't a stigmatizing type of thing that we want to do, but, we've done the Myers-Briggs or we've done the different personality tests trying to sort of figure out who we are, what we love, just help us to understand ourselves better. So maybe it's more of a spin on, like you said, meeting them there and finding what their strengths are. I love that.
Exactly. And focusing in on that, focusing in on that, and definitely share that quote. It leads my work and it leads a lot of the work of other educators as well when we're trying to embrace those students and get them to really engage in the transition planning process. The meeting is going to happen, but we want you to be here, or we want your voice to be heard. Nothing about me without me. Decisions are being made. And so we need your voice. We need you to have input into this meeting.
Definitely. Another kind of question that came in was about maybe when to initiate that referral or conversation starting with the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. What is the right age range for that?
So wonderful, wonderful. I'm glad that came in because there's a lot of pre-ETS information out there right now, but they can begin at age 14 for some of their services. Your DARS counselor, so please contact your Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services counselor, and they can let you know of all of the pre-ETS domains that they serve and what can be provided at what age. But they are able to provide some services to students within all of the transition age range, beginning at age 14. So just check with your DARS counselor and your school case manager, and they will be able to provide additional information about that.
Right. And I guess if you're starting late in the game, today would be good.
Today, if you're starting late, today is great. Reach out today and find out what is available, because there's a lot of things going on with pre-ETS right now, a lot of activities. So just find out exactly, and I think you'll be pleased when you reach out to your DARS counselor to be able to find out about some of the wonderful transition activities.
Yeah, I wonder if they are able to use that summer time to sort of get a head start on some of those things. So this might be perfect if you can get over there.
Yes, for sure. Some DARS counselors I've heard they are planning for some activities this summer. So again, contact your DARS counselor or your school case manager, and they can help you to get in contact with that DARS rep for that.
Yep. Oh, and another one of our participants recommended something also for somebody who may be as sort of resistant is a peer mentoring situation. Could be a positive influence as well.
Yes. Yes. And one of the reasons, again, I'm going to give another shout out to I'm Determined, but one of the reasons that project is something that I encourage, because remember, those young people are there and they're youth leaders. So when they're talking and they're really providing their story to some of our young people, it really does help them to be fully engaged in the process. And they're saying, oh my goodness, you know, we've had young people to attend the conference, the summit, and come back and say, wow, this was amazing. Or even in their virtual, the virtual summits that they're doing now, they just find out so much more about young people. So peer mentors are awesome.
That's wonderful. We are 1 minute from our 1 o'clock deadline here. I'm dropping the I'm Determined website into the chat. Somebody was sort of asking about what types of available through that, activities and such. I highly recommend going and taking a look at the website so that you don't miss out on anything that's coming up there. Okay, and then I think that we're gonna sort of, oh wait, one more thing. Thank you. No luck so far with DARS, or can DARS make continued services dependent upon those other steps? Oh, like, are there things that you have to do before DARS can start working with you?
So because each situation is going to be different, check with your case manager or your DARS counselor. Right now, I think they're still having like the pre-ETS counselor and then the VR counselor, but they are going to all just be VR counselors very soon. So check in your division and see exactly what is offered under that pre-ETS umbrella for you all and what those requirements are.
That's wonderful. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and drop the information about next week's Lunch and Learn into the chat. You can click on the register here link if you want to take a look at it, but we're gonna have Kristen Hamilton and Crystal Hentz, who are fabulous employment specialists with BCU RRTC, and they're gonna be talking about benefits of early employment experiences and just sort of preparing for post employment and those types of things. So we're really excited to have them talking with us. And again, thank you so much, Chiquita. Any last comment before we sign off today?
No. So thank you all so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I hope that you truly enjoy transition planning and find it as exciting as I do.
Definitely. All right. Well,
thank you so much, Chiquita. We appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Love it. Have a good day.